Lawmakers left Washington this week without a deal to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Democrats want major reforms to the way immigration officers operate following the deaths of 2 Americans in Minnesota amid those tense protests in the Twin Cities.
Tensions between the United States and Iran diffuse to die. Despite the insistence on dialogue, threats and counter-threats continue unabated.
The last government shutdown ended, and as of this morning, a new one has begun. This one targets the Department of Homeland Security, with Democrats demanding federal immigration agents remove their masks, wear ID, and operate without racial profiling.
Today, we're going to talk about a major story in U.S. politics that is dominating headlines right now. It's a story that connects American foreign policy in the Middle East with a serious political fight here at home in Washington, D.C. On one hand, the President of the United States has made statements that have shocked many around the world. He has talked openly about the idea of a change in power in Iran, and at the same time, the United States is sending more military forces to the region than usual. At the same time, right here in the U.S., Congress has reached a deadlock over how to fund the Department of Homeland Security, and that fight has led to a partial shutdown of that department. President Trump's comments suggest that he believes the current leadership in Iran is deeply problematic for the United States and for stability in the region. He did not outline a specific plan for how such a change would happen or who might take power instead, but his words mark a shift toward a more confrontational tone than usual in U.S. policy. At the same time, the United States is building up its military presence in the Middle East. A second aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, has been ordered to the region to join another aircraft carrier that was already there, the USS Abraham Lincoln. This is not something that happens very often. Aircraft carriers are huge warships with fighter jets, helicopters, and thousands of crew members. Sending them to a region signals that the U.S. government is taking potential conflict very seriously. The official reason for this military movement is that the U.S. wants to pressure Iran to negotiate more seriously. But military leaders also use these ships to make sure American forces are ready if things get worse. So on the foreign policy side, we have 2 major facts. The president has openly talked about the possibility of a change in power in Iran. The U.S. has increased its military presence in the Middle East by sending a second aircraft carrier. These 2 developments together show that the United States is preparing for possible escalation, whether through negotiations or through military pressure. Many analysts around the world are watching closely because any conflict involving the U.S. and Iran could impact regional stability, global energy markets, and international relations. Now let's switch to what's happening inside the United States with Congress and the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security, often called DHS, is one of the major federal departments in the U.S. It oversees many key security operations. It runs airport security, it helps coordinate disaster response, and it oversees immigration enforcement agencies like Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. DHS plays a major role in keeping the country safe. Every year, Congress has to approve funding for DHS. This means lawmakers have to agree on a spending bill that provides money so the department can keep operating. But this year, lawmakers failed to reach an agreement on that funding. The reason for the disagreement is immigration enforcement. Democratic lawmakers are demanding changes to the way immigration agents operate, including things like requiring warrants for certain enforcement actions, improving accountability, and adding protections like body cameras. Many Democrats point to public outrage over aggressive enforcement actions and want federal laws to reflect those concerns. Republicans, including the president's own party, have pushed back against those demands. They argue that adding those restrictions would hinder the ability of immigration officers to do their jobs. On top of that, Republicans want to focus on border security and enforcement, not on limiting those powers. Because the 2 sides could not agree, the spending bill didn't pass. As a result, the Department of Homeland Security partially shut down at 12:01 a.m. on February 14, 2026. A partial shutdown means that certain parts of the agency stop operating normally and many workers remain on duty but are not being paid until funding is approved. It's important to understand that this is not a complete federal government shutdown. Other departments, like the Treasury or Education, may continue to operate, but when DHS is without funding, it affects many services that people rely on every day. For example, Transportation Security Administration workers who screen luggage and passengers at airports may still work, but they are doing so without pay until Congress fixes the funding. This can create low morale, staffing problems, and longer wait times at airports. Similarly, disaster response teams and border enforcement activities are affected. FEMA may still respond to emergencies, but budget limits could reduce effectiveness. Even services we take for granted can be disrupted if the shutdown continues for a long time. So the fight over immigration policy and funding has real consequences for Americans in their everyday lives. The answer is that both of these events reflect a nation at a crossroads, struggling to define its priorities and how it interacts with the world. In terms of foreign policy, the statements from the president about Iran signal a willingness to take bold, even risky steps. Whether it's calling for changes in another country's government or positioning military assets to show strength, these decisions could shape world events for years to come. At the same time, the political battle in Congress shows how deeply divided America is on domestic policy issues, especially immigration. Lawmakers in the U.S. are failing to agree even on basic issues like how to fund a major security department because they cannot find common ground. Some critics of the president argue that focusing on foreign policy and military power while domestic governance struggles could weaken the United States. They say that without a unified government at home, actions abroad may lack support or clarity. Other supporters argue that strong leadership on world issues is necessary and that domestic disagreements are part of the normal political process. The truth is probably somewhere in between. From your perspective as someone watching this unfold, it's important to ask, what does this mean for you? First, if the situation with Iran continues to escalate, it could have consequences for global oil prices, for U.S. relationships with allies, and even for American troops stationed overseas. Even people who never follow foreign policy closely could feel economic or social effects if tensions rise further. Second, a partial shutdown of DHS affects people in subtle and direct ways. Flight delays, slower border processing, and reduced disaster response capabilities are realities that come with a funding gap. While lawmakers argue in Washington, real services that people depend on can be impacted. This story also highlights something bigger: the growing polarization in American politics. When leaders cannot come together to fund essential parts of government, it shows a deeper division in the country. That's something that many Americans worry about, no matter their political beliefs. Right now, lawmakers are under pressure to find a compromise that will reopen DHS funding. That could mean changes to immigration enforcement that satisfy some Democrats and some Republicans, but getting that deal done will take negotiation and time. On the foreign policy side, the U.S. will continue discussions with Iran, even as military forces remain in place. Diplomats are still trying to find a peaceful path forward on nuclear negotiations, even as tensions simmer underneath.